I didn't know what to expect going into her story. I'm mainly a Game Pass player, so seeing a game I'll no doubt talk about in future, Immortality, pop up on the recent edition section, a game I watched the trailer of and instantly thought, why has this game got the name Sam Barlow all over the marketing like he's Hideo Kojima? A marketing tactic that usually works to get people interested in certain works, much like Tarantino or Scorsese, names that can appeal to fans and get casual audiences to go, oh yeah, I've heard of them before, but I myself hadn't heard the name Sam Barlow before, and I felt out the loop, so I quickly looked up the games that popped up under his name, one of which was Her Story, and I discovered it was also on Game Pass, well, the PC version anyway, a game which, on the surface, could seem very dull and boring. For all intents and purposes, the game is just a short section of clips featuring a woman called Hannah. You have no idea who you are as the watcher at the beginning of the game, but you have a computer screen in front of you and a word typed in the search bar, murder, along with some clips for you to view. Now, you instantly view those clips and listen to the woman talk briefly. Not knowing what to do afterwards, well, I didn't anyway, so I looked around the screen and saw the read me first notes and clicked on the other parts of the screen which are interactable, discovering that you can type words into the search bar and find other clips for you to view. Now, it was at this point that I figured I must be some sort of detective, right? This is a police database, and maybe I'm like Sherlock Holmes. I've come in to help the police, and I've got to solve the crime for them, as the first few clips under the murder section seem to show a woman at first looking to find her missing husband, semi not accepting his murder, but accepting it in later clips down the timeline, and then seeming to say what she has said previously is nothing but stories, probably as she is going down for the crime. So you type in various words: husband, crime, death, victim, his name, which is Simon, her name, which is Hannah, and after watching the clips you really start to delve almost voyeuristically into this woman's entire life. This is Her Story. It's a very apt title for a game, and your experience and enjoyment of it will no doubt depend on how much of a nosy park you are and how much you're into gossip, as Her Story, her history, as you delve deeper and deeper into the murky depths of what makes her whole, becomes deeply disturbing and almost fairy tale-like on purpose. I played this with my wife, who is a much better gossip and nosy parker than I ever could be, and she was here telling me what to type. I was interested in the crime, the murder, the victim. I wanted to see what had happened, what people's alibis were. But my wife, she was interested in the affairs. She was interested in her pregnancy, the blonde woman her husband was seeing, the hairs which weren't hers found in the bedroom, the pub meetings, her husband's conference getaways. For me, this game was a murder mystery. For my wife, this was a soap opera. And both of us were getting served with more than enough desserts to go along with our mains as the story unravelled. There were lots of oohs and ahs as we fought to type in the next set of words, hoping to discover the next set of clips to satisfy our desires. And we discovered we were deeply engrossed in this woman's life, a woman we had mixed feelings about, and your enjoyment will no doubt vary with this experience, because if you don't get the clips, if you don't fall for the charm of the woman's slowly unravelling story, this game would never hook you, and you'll no doubt give up on it a bit too early. It's not anyone's fault. Games as an interactive medium are not meant to be satisfying to a wide audience like films are. Not everyone has the time and patience to finish Dark Souls, for instance, and I can see people jumping out of this and checking the plot summary on Reddit or Wiki and going, what the fuck? Because it really goes places, and if it hooks you, you're along for the ride, baby, and it's super fun exploring someone's sordid story, warts and all. I myself have to finishing over 75% of the clips. Yes, I've not done 100%, but I'm satisfied and reached the ending having a different interpretation to the story and its reveals that is semi sort of different to my wife. And that right there, it turns out, is the point of this whole experience. But for me, the biggest reveal at the end is that you are basically the daughter of one of the perpetrators or perpetrator, depending on how you look at it. And you're finding out what happened to your dad, and the lies of your mother is also strangely revealing. And it ends up leaving you with many questions as to what would happen when you log off and go over the road, like the message says. A question left unanswered by the game. But getting to that point is very revealing. Basically, my interpretation is that Hannah and her twin sister Eve, yes, I have fell for the twins effect part of the story for now at least, they killed Hannah's husband Simon and hid his body in the cellar of their parents' house. Now, my wife has subscribed to the theory that Hannah and Eve are one in the same, and that she has a split personality disorder, a theory which is also very valid as the game has unreliable narrator syndrome. And upon learning that you're not a detective but Hannah/Eve's daughter, you understand the whole point of the experience, seeing that one or both of them is a very manipulative and controlling narcissistic person, hoping to manipulate their daughter's emotions to bring them on their side and make them out to be the sympathetic, hard done by person who never had a choice and was shackled to the other and the cheating husband. It's very well done, and my wife didn't quite catch that part, and this is why I believe this game's experience has to be personally played by you and not read off Reddit or Wiki, as it's very open to interpretation, especially when you don't hear anything from the police detectives at all during any of the gameplay, and you don't know what happened with the case or if anyone was arrested and took to court for the murder. Either way, I approached the story from a detective's point of view, and this here is my interpretation. Take it for what you will and feel free to disagree. That's the great thing about the open-endedness of this game. So, Hannah and Eve were born as twins. Eve was nearly strangled to death, and the midwife, who didn't have children of her own, kidnapped the girl and brought her up as her own daughter, living just over the road. As Eve grew up in isolation, not able to leave the house, she discovered through her kidnapper's diary what had happened, and she may or may not have pushed her down the stairs, killing her to escape the witch's castle, as she puts it. Going over the road to meet her reflection, her twin sister Hannah, who had a pretty normal life and upbringing with her actual parents. Telling the story, they decide to become one person. Eve hides in the attic with the dollhouse that gets mentioned quite a lot, and the books, mainly fairy tales, they sunk themselves into as youths, like Rapunzel. They take it in turns to go out and live one life, leaving the other in the attic hidden away as they put to use each other's strengths and keep diaries to state what happened. Hannah is shyer and more academic, whilst Eve is more outgoing and carefree. Eve loses her virginity to a singer called Carl and starts to sleep around with various men, getting herself an STD, whilst Hannah, now working part-time at a glazer's, meets Simon, who is, much like her from what I can tell, a bit more boring and shy, getting herself pregnant after the first time they slept together at either 15 or 16, I couldn't quite tell. But Simon gets a full-time job as a glass fitter. They move in with his parents and get married, upsetting Eve because she can't get pregnant, so she has to live a singular life now from the attic, going out in a blonde wig and becoming a singer at a local pub, whilst at 8 months into their pregnancy, Hannah ends up losing the baby. It's at this point Hannah's parents also mysteriously die, potentially killed by Eve as they die from eating the wrong type of mushrooms, something her dad would have been able to know as he basically grew them. Either way, Eve moves out and gets her own place, becoming a full-time singer. As far as I can tell, she might still be living in the attic. I'm unsure at this part of the tale. Either way, Hannah and Simon move into her parents' house. Many years pass, I believe, as they live their separate lives. At least that's what I can remember, as I think Anna says she's been married for 10 years during the first set of interviews, and as Hannah is basically infertile, it must be hard on the relationship, as Simon, whilst at a conference or during one of his pub trips, meets Eve wearing her blonde wig, and they start to have an affair, with Eve getting pregnant not long after. Hannah and Eve argue about the pregnancy. Eve drives up to Glasgow and getting into an accident, having to spend some time in A&E, whilst Hannah dresses up at Eve in front of Simon, basically hearing him want to leave his wife and be with the now pregnant Eve. Hannah reveals her ruse after being furious at receiving a mirror he's made, something that was supposed to be unique for her, and yet it's something he made two of, and after he punches Hannah, she slashes his throat, killing Simon. It's at this point Eve returns from Glasgow and they hide his body, pretending to become one person again to mislead the police and try to get away with a crime. Something I don't know they can get away with. I doubt they do, as the police have a hell of a lot of evidence and seem to be asking her if she's a twin at one point, and the final interview with Eve is pretty telling as she reveals all, saying Hannah is now gone, and that is where it basically all but ends. You have the story, now go meet your mother across the road. It's very open-ended and is deeply personal, being out of sequence for each discovery depending on what you type into the search bar. My experience would be completely different to yours, for instance, and that's very unique, as we will eventually all reach similar conclusions, but the journey through her life will weave differently, and your interpretations will be different to mine. As I said, I played this with my wife, but coming at it from a detective or soap perspective led us to see and hear one perspective completely differently. My best guess is they are twins. Hannah is potentially dead, as Eve is potentially a vindictive serial killer, and as they trade places during the interview process, you begin to see Eve as the more confident one and Hannah as the less shy, open and potentially story-ruining person or personality. If they are twins, I believe Eve has killed Hannah. If they are personalities, I believe Eve has become the dominant one. There is a point made that they have a knock code, and if you unravel it, it basically says "Bye Hannah," along with another saying "Love you." There is talk of different hairs in the bed. There is talk of different fingerprints, and both perspectives can fit within the unreliable narration. From a detective perspective, I would still be arresting Eve and sending her down for the crime of involuntary manslaughter, as she could have been potentially protecting herself from Simon's outburst. Someone who I believe is a very confused man, someone who is as much a victim of her or both their manipulation. See, if they are twins, then they took it in turns to be with him at various points, and he has fell for them both realistically. Yes, he's been married to Hannah for years, but who's to say they haven't taken it in turns at various points, leading him on and confusing him even more, making him care for one personality over the other, or one person over the other. And if they are just one person, you have to remember that Hannah at this point is pregnant with his child, a blooming miracle from his perspective, and her masquerading with a blonde wig, which from his perspective was maybe being done to potentially spice up their sex life and breathe fresh air into it just makes you feel more sympathy for him. Yes, he shouldn't have hit her, but it's been 10 years or so of this, and she is angry at him for cheating, whilst she is stood there in front of him, pregnant. He has never cheated, and he's probably on the verge of leaving. Still, he shouldn't have lashed out like he did, and then he paid the ultimate price. His throat slashed and him left bleeding to death on the living room floor. But there is other parts I don't understand, like how she would hide his body in the cellar for so long on her own. Moving it down there would have been a struggle, and then there is little things like the tattoo and bruise marks from Simon's punch. It all seems to point towards twins. She couldn't have spent the night with Simon whilst in Glasgow, for instance. Time of death and a post-mortem would have been able to open up more of the case, but you never learn what the detectives know. All you see is her story, as that's all she wanted you to see. Feel sorry for me, as I, Eve, was away in prison or away from your life, Sarah, my daughter, and you, the voyeur, got to experience that ride also, coming to your own conclusion as to what happened in 1994. And with that, I want to say that I very much enjoyed this game. It was unique and left me thinking about it for days after. The game itself wasn't long. We completed it in about 3 hours during one morning whilst the kids were off at school and my wife wasn't at work. I don't know if I'd have liked to pay full price for this experience, but this is the type of game Game Pass does wonders with, and I'm excited now to play Sam Barlow's other games. So if you'd like to hear my thoughts on those, please leave me a like, subscribe, and thanks for listening.